A study had participants sample foods and rank them from most addictive to least addictive. I bet you can guess some of the foods that are highly addictive, but what do those foods have in common that make us crave them? In this video, I share the list of most and least addictive foods, as well as insights that reveal the lethal combination of ingredients that make certain foods irresistible. Two groups of people were asked to rate 35 foods to determine which of the foods were most associated with addictive-like eating behaviors. One group was asked to rate the foods by how likely they were to experience a problem with the food, like not wanting to stop eating it or an inability to cut down despite the desire to do so or negative consequences. That group named these 10 foods as the most addictive: pizza, chocolate, chips, cookies, ice cream, French fries, cheeseburger, regular soda, cake, and cheese. The other group came up with a very similar ranking when they compared each food against another. So this list has very few surprises. But what is it about these foods that make so many of us feel out of control when we eat them? Well, when we look closely at that chart, we see that 9 of the top 10 are processed foods. As stated by the research team, highly processed foods compared to naturally occurring foods are more likely to induce a blood sugar spike. This is important because there is a known link between glucose levels and activation of areas of the brain that are involved with addiction. And we can measure the degree to which a food will raise your blood sugar by using tools like glycemic index and glycemic load. This study that I'm discussing used glycemic load because it also takes into account the grams of refined carbohydrates contained in the food. A low glycemic load is between 1 and 10, a moderate level is 11 to 19, and a high level is 20 or higher. And we see from the food chart that 8 out of the top 10 most addictive foods have a moderate or high glycemic load. Processing or refining a food also strips out the fiber, protein, and water, which increases the rate that the refined food is absorbed into your system. And it is this ability to get absorbed quickly, paired with the spike in blood sugar, that the team theorized had a lot to do with the addictive nature of a food. And this theory holds true if we take a look at the foods that were ranked the least addictive. Those foods include strawberries, corn with no butter or salt, salmon, bananas, broccoli, plain brown rice with no sauce, apples, beans with no sauce, carrots, and cucumbers with no dip. Now, you'll notice that these less addictive foods are all whole foods that have not been processed, and 8 out of 10 of them have a glycemic load under 10, which is a low score. You'll also notice that when I read through the list of least addictive foods, that many of them had extra descriptive words like no butter, no sauce, and no dip. While it might be more palatable to eat cucumbers with dip and corn with butter, the research team felt that the addition of fat to these foods would have bumped them up on the addictive scale. Dietary fat does not spike your blood sugar or absorb quickly into your system like we see with refined carbs and processed foods. So the fat content of a food did not seem to be the highest addictive factor, but if we look at the chart, we see that the most addictive foods that are listed at the top tend to be higher in fat than the foods that come in at the bottom. But take a closer look at those high fat foods and you'll notice that they have a combination of addictive elements. They are processed, they have a high glycemic load, and they contain fat. Could this be the lethal combination that makes a food irresistible? You know, I often say that chocolate does nothing for me but make me want more chocolate. Society, we have sayings like you can't eat just one potato chip. You know, most of us can relate to that. Chocolate and chips have the trifecta of fat, refined carbs, and a substantial glycemic load. But there's more to this story. Before the test, participants were asked to complete the Yale Food Addiction Scale, which is a questionnaire used to determine their level of food addiction symptoms. Those who rated high on the scale were more apt to report foods as addictive, showing that some of us may be more susceptible to food addiction than others. According to the research team, individuals who scored high on the scale reported increased difficulty with foods containing rapidly absorbed refined carbohydrates, which produce a large blood sugar spike. And there was an interesting difference between men and women that surfaced during the research study. The study found that men, more so than women, reported problems with unprocessed foods like steak and cheese, which suggested that men may experience problematic eating behaviors with a wider range of foods. So there are two takeaways from this study. Takeaway number one is that a food becomes highly addictive when it is processed and combined with added amounts of fat and/or refined carbohydrates. Think pizza, chocolate, chips, and cookies. Takeaway number two is that some of us are more susceptible to food addiction than others. So we are all best served if we stick to whole, unprocessed foods. Thanks for watching. I hope this has been interesting and helpful. If you are looking for a way to get away from addictive processed foods, I invite you to learn my 4 daily habits, which are also known as my 0-1-2-3 strategy. This strategy is free to download, and it has been downloaded by tens of thousands of people. It's a great foundation for any healthy diet. Thanks so much. Please subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you know when my next video is coming out. Till then, have a great week.